Hi everyone, and welcome to Jane Talks Trek, where I'll be talking about and reviewing an episode of the original series, The Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, or Enterprise. Today, I'm looking at Dear Doctor from Enterprise's first season, or as I like to call it, that time Doc Phlox primed everyone's directive. This episode was requested by Redacted, so thank you for the suggestion, and let's get going. We begin the episode with Phlox walking into sickbay and feeding his animals, sharing bugs with one of them, and into the credits we go. Hoshi arrives for a letter from his friend from the interspecies medical exchange, Dr. Lucas, who we will meet in Season 4, and Hoshi makes a date for language lessons later on. Phlox listens to the letter, which mentions mating season on his home world. I'm picturing this.
Grah! Keep your jelly away from my eggs.
Grah! And Phlox begins narrating his reply, which will go on throughout the entire episode. He visits Trip in Engineering, whose guy has gotten himself burned, so after patching him up, he goes to the mess hall where Malcolm doesn't want to stop and talk because he's in a rush. Archer brings Porthos to see him.
You've been feeding him cheese again, haven't you? You've got to learn how to say no, Captain.
Aw, look how cute! And now it's movie time with crewman Cutler, but he's more interested in everyone's reactions rather than the movie itself. Ooh, popcorn! And Trip is crying. After the movie, Phlox and Cutler talk about the human heart, which is pretty tragic considering what happened to the actress a little over a year later, and they have an awkward conversation that ends in a little kiss. Phlox puzzles over whether Cutler has romantic feelings for him or not, as Enterprise comes upon a wrecked ship with 2 weak life signs. One of the survivors wakes up in sickbay and talks about an illness that has wiped out millions of his people, so they left their planet to try and find more advanced people who would come up with a cure, and asks Phlox for help. T'Pol says even though they're pre-warp, it's acceptable to help them, so Phlox is set to work, and after scanning the 2 survivors, he goes to dinner with Hoshi, where she asks about his relationship with Cutler. Enterprise visits the survivors' home planet, where they're shown around their medical facility, and Phlox comes up with a way to help the symptoms, while they look for a cure, and Hoshi runs into an alien who the universal translator can't understand. T'Pol advises Archer to assign someone to keep an eye on Phlox and his stuff in case the aliens start nicking, while Hoshi still struggles with the alien's language until the Doctor explains he's Menk, a different and more inferior species to the Volockians. Archer is surprised that both species coexist, and the Doctor says the Menk are immune to the disease. Nice ring binders, but due to their incompatible physiologies, the Menk can't help them. Phlox wants all the info on the disease and the Menk and pokes around the facility, recruiting Cutler to help, before breaking the news to a put-out T'Pol that her teeth are jank. While he fixes them, he asks her advice about Cutler, but she's quite cynical.
Be careful.
Before being summoned by Archer for a progress report, where he explains the disease is genetic and will wipe out the Volockians entirely in the next 200 years. A cure would be very difficult but not impossible to find, so he visits the Menk community to run some tests, who are more than happy to help, and one surprises them by speaking a little English. But it also comes out that the Menk are not allowed to make their own things or grow their own food. It's all provided by the Volockians. The same Menk organizes the blood samples collected, which impresses Phlox, and he feels the Menk are underestimated, while Cutler thinks they're being oppressed and they should do something, so the two get into a discussion over it. Phlox then tells her he has 3 wives who each have 3 husbands, including himself, which she's shocked by, and it all gets very awkward, so she says she just wants to be friends. Archer visits the ship survivor, who thanks him for his help, but wants warp drive to go look for more help. They're there. And back on board, T'Pol reports people on the surface have been bugging her about finding a cure. Archer explains what the guy asked for, and T'Pol says, not a bloody chance, which Archer agrees with. But what he's struggling most with is these people pinning all their hopes on them helping them.
I'm beginning to understand how the Vulcans must have felt.
Phlox and Archer meet in the mess hall, where Phlox says finding a cure would be unethical because it would interfere with the natural order of things, because the Menk could become the dominant species, but Archer doesn't want to choose.
All I'm saying is that we let nature make the choice.
But Archer says he's a doctor and has to help, which opens up a big debate before Phlox reveals he's already found a cure. The next day, Archer tells Phlox he's going down to the planet without the cure, but the Volockian doctor is not happy with just medicine to ease the symptoms and no warp drive, but tough. And Phlox finishes off his letter to Dr. Lucas, which he gives to Hoshi, who advises him to get out of sickbay for a bit, so he calls crewman Cutler for company.
I could use a friend right about now.
Ugh, this episode makes me so mad because this is what the show should have been about. Forget the temporal Cold War and time travel. Forget about the Xindi. This is what the show should have been throughout, and I'm mad that it's not. Enterprise is certainly divisive, but I love the first 2 seasons and hate the Xindi storyline. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Xindi stuff is good, but it doesn't belong in the format of a prequel. You know what does though? Dear Doctor! Episodes like this and Desert Crossing really show why the Prime Directive and other Star Trek rules were put in place. And episodes like Vox Solar show how difficult First Contact was with a lack of experience. Not to mention great episodes like Vanishing Point and Minefield, which have crew members getting used to their situation. But back to Dear Doctor. It was nice to have the focus be on a character outside of Trip, T'Pol and Archer. And Phlox is such a good one as he's very insightful, and his low-key energy means he doesn't get rattled easily, but will still argue his point if he feels strongly enough about it. Usually, I'm not a big fan of a lot of voiceovers and narration, but I feel it works in the context of a letter to a friend because it allows Phlox to express feelings that can't necessarily be shown. It's great to have Phlox's perspective, as at this point he and T'Pol are the only aliens on board, and we rarely get to hear Phlox's opinion outside of medical cases. So it's nice to see things through his eyes and learn more about him as a Denobulan and a character. In Enterprise, there's a lot of focus on the Vulcans stifling the humans' progress, so to have an outside perspective is refreshing and it helps you to see both sides of the argument. The Vulcans are hampering the humans' progress, but they also do have a point. Without the Vulcans on their case, or in this instance Phlox, Archer could change the course of countless species without even realizing it. And that's the crux of this episode and why it's such a good discussion point. Saving one species could prevent another from developing further in the future. But what's more important, dealing with a problem in the here and now that you could solve, or do nothing to avoid a problem that could occur a couple of 100 years in the future? Instinct says help those who need help now, but the Prime Directive and other Starfleet regulations were put in place to eliminate the need to choose, to prevent that ethical dilemma. But before that, Archer had to make the call alone. What was interesting about this particular case was there was a lot of people with opinions. The Volokians obviously wanted to help and were quite forceful about it. Cutler thought the Menk were being mistreated, T'Pol has an opinion on everything, and Archer has his own preconceived ideas of what he should do. But Phlox's voice is the one that makes the difference, and that's important for both Phlox as a character and Archer as a captain. A really solid episode with a lot to think about. So there you have it. That was Dear Doctor. If there's an episode of Star Trek you'd like me to cover, pop it down in the comments below or come say hi on social media. If you enjoyed this video, then please hit that like button, it really does mean a lot, or consider subscribing if you want to be assimilated into my channel. Alternatively, feel free to check out my other YouTube channels. Thank you so much for watching, I'll speak to you soon, and live long and prosper.